please talk to me, because while I'm showing you the slides, I cannot read your messages. So with group 10, you have finished them, but I suppose that it won't be bad for you if we go through these slides again, I suppose. Okay, so we can start with those slides, and if you like, we can start from the beginning after that. Is that okay?
Okay, yes.
Good. Just a second, please. So, slide 24, the pulmonary abscess. Okay, so what do you see here is a lung, although it doesn't look like a lung. But if you look closer, you will see at the periphery of the slide that there are some alveolar structures, and this is how you will recognize that this is a lung, actually. Here we have some alveolar structures as well. Okay, you can see these bronchioli. Here, one here, there is another one over here. They're lined with columnar epithelium. So, and here we have another bronchiolus. And you can easily see that there are some alveolar structures here as well. But these alveoli should be airborne, and they are not here. And you will see that they are full of some pink fluid, and also that there are some inflammatory cells in those alveoli. So that means that we have a lung with inflammation. That means pneumonia. And the next thing that you have to say is what kind of pneumonia is this. When I zoom out, you will see that in this lung there are several cavitations. Here there are two great cavities, here and here, and several smaller cavities over here. When you look at these cavities, you will see that these cavities are full of neutrophilic granulocytes, and these neutrophilic, such abundance of neutrophils means purulent inflammation. And when it is in a cavity, that means an abscess. Okay, so here we have a pulmonary abscess, and the next thing that you have to say is that fresh abscess or a chronic one. The difference between the fresh abscesses and chronic abscesses is the presence of capsule, fibrous capsule. Here, if you look at the edges of this cavity, you will see that there is no connective tissue here. There are only some macrophages, there are some fibroblasts, but not collagen here, so there is no fibrous capsule surrounding this abscess. That means that this is a fresh abscess. And as we have a lung with multiple abscesses, we can define this as abscedating pneumonia. Is that clear? Do you need to know something more about this slide? Okay, so we continue with the next one. And this is slide number 24, which is another type of pneumonia. This is the pneumonia. Okay, here again, you first have to recognize that this is a lung, and well, you can clearly see this alveolar structure of the organ. When you zoom in, you will see that these alveoli are also full of inflammatory cells, and these inflammatory cells here are mostly neutrophilic granulocytes. But they are not so abundant as they are in the purulent inflammation, and also we have some other cells between them. We have some red blood cells here, and maybe most important thing in this slide is that we have more abundant exudative part of inflammation, and that exudate here is mostly fibrin. When we have so much fibrin in inflammatory exudate, we define this as fibrinous inflammation. And actually, here we have a fibrinous pneumonia. For some historical reasons, this fibrinous inflammation is called Kruppe's inflammation. So we can define this as Kruppe's pneumonia. Another, maybe an artificial sign of Kruppe's pneumonia are these slits here, these gaps between the inflammatory exudate and the walls uh, of the alveoli. They are artificial. This is an artificial phenomenon due to the tissue processing. But actually, you can see that only in the Kruppe's pneumonia from all the pneumonia. Another thing that you can find here is that actually the most of the specimen is obtained by this the most of the specimen is obtained by this inflammatory infiltrate, and there are no airborne alveoli at all. When we see such a phenomenon, we define this as lobar pneumonia. Well, this is not an absolute sign of lobar pneumonia, because you saw that from the previous slide, we had some there were no airborne alveoli as well, but anyway, this is a lobar pneumonia. The Kruppe's pneumonia obtains usually a whole lobe or a whole lung, so we define this as lobar pneumonia. Is that clear for you? Okay, so we continue with slide number
Sorry, can you hear me?
26.
Hi.
And we continue with, this is the last type of inflammation here. Later on we continue, oh no, not the last one. Okay, so this Kruppe's pneumonia, pulmonary abscess, the previous one is the fibrinous pericarditis, phlegmonous appendicitis. These are all, okay, did someone want to ask something?
Yes, there was a question. Which stage of lobar pneumonia is this?
Of the lobar pneumonia.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay, I will tell you now. I just can hear very well. So, if you look at the inflammatory exodus, you will see that it is composed mostly of neutrophilic granulocytes, and there is just few red blood cells here. This is a red blood cell. This is a red blood cell. Here we have a couple of them, but they are, well, maybe they are in a vessel here. But anyway, there are just a few red blood cells. If there was abundance of red blood cells, then we would define this as red hepatization. But here, as there are just a few red blood cells, we define this as gray hepatization. So it's the third stage of the pneumonia. But in other locations, for example, in this area, we see that the red blood cells are a little bit more. So maybe we have a transition here between the red and gray hepatization. You know that in the Krupel's pneumonia, we have 4 stages. The first stage is of hyperemia, and then actually the bacteria, they are beta hemolytic streptococci, so they damage the blood vessels, and because of this vessel damage, we have recruitment of so many red blood cells. Actually, we have some hemorrhages in the alveoli. That's why the next stage is the stage of red hepatization, where we have these fibrin fibers, neutrophils, and abundance of red blood cells. Later on, these red blood cells are absorbed. So you can hear how many red blood cells here are. Maybe this is in the stage of red hepatization. But in other places, you will see that the red blood cells have almost vanished, and there are almost no red blood cells there. So there we can define this as gray hepatization. So this is a transition between red and gray hepatization. Okay, so we continue with the chronic inflammation in slide number 26. So about the granulation, about the chronic inflammation, you know that in chronic inflammation we have several types of chronic inflammations, several general types of chronic inflammation. It is a diffuse chronic inflammation, granulomatous chronic inflammation, and polypose chronic inflammation. When we talk about diffuse chronic inflammation, we mostly mean this granulation tissue. And here is actually this granulation tissue. How do we know that this is a granulation tissue? Okay, first in this specimen, you see that it is composed of fragments of tissue. When we look when we zoom in, you will see that in this tissue we have abundance of inflammatory cells. When we look at these inflammatory cells, you will see that, well, here we have mostly plasma cells, some lymphocytes, and neutrophilic granulocytes. So it is an inflammation. And as the most prominent part of this inflammation are actually mononuclears. These are the plasma cells, lymphocytes, and just a few neutrophilic granulocytes. We can define this as chronic inflammation. Well, in this inflammatory infiltrate, you will see that there are plenty of these thin-walled blood vessels. They are thin-walled and they are full of red blood cells, you see. And actually, these blood vessels are all over the place. They are so abundant. And between them, we have some fibrin fibers, some collagen fibers. So we have all the components of granulation tissue. Actually, this is the tissue through which the wounds heal. When we have a wound somewhere, for example, there is a hemorrhage or there is some bleeding because of cut of the skin or something, you know that the blood usually stops by making a blood clot. And this blood clot is composed mostly of these fibrin fibers like it is over here, and maybe some captured blood cells as well, mostly red blood cells. But you know that this fibrin usually starts organizing after a few days. And usually, you know that in time, in a couple of weeks, that cloth is substituted by connective tissue and forms connective tissue scar. Well, this process of scarification and healing of wounds goes through the stage of formation of these blood vessels, because when we have a tissue has to heal, usually it heals through production of collagen, and that collagen is produced by fibroblasts, and these fibroblasts would need energy and nutrients in order to synthesize that collagen. That's why in the area of the blood clot, usually we have proliferation of capillaries. We have proliferation of endothelial cells that form these thin-walled capillaries. The fibrin usually has white color, and this proliferation of capillaries is in contrast to that white color of fibrin, forms red granule-like structures. These are actually the capillaries which are full of blood. And if you peel a crust of a wound, you will see usually that there is some white tissue underneath and plenty of these red dots that are very easily bleeding. They are easily bleeding because they have so thin walls of their capillaries. And that's why we call this granulation tissue, because we have these red granules of capillaries on the white background of fibrin, as it is here. So, and of course, this process is an inflammatory process. That's why we have so many inflammatory cells. And as this process you see is a diffuse process, we define this as a diffuse type of chronic inflammation. In all types of chronic inflammation, we have several components. It is the mononuclear inflammatory infiltrate, and you can see here that the inflammatory infiltrate is mostly of plasma cells, lymphocytes, which are mononuclear cells. There are also some macrophages, and so that we have mononuclear inflammatory infiltrate, and here we have this, and the other component of chronic inflammation, it is the fibrosis. And here we can see that amongst the fibrin fibers, we have some thicker collagen fibers. Here they are produced by the fibroblasts, and this whole process ends with fibrosis of the area. So actually we have fibrosis in this type of inflammation as well. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show. This is the granulation tissue. So granulation tissue, well, you will see everywhere there is a wound, everywhere there is some necrosis, everywhere there is some thrombosis. So actually, all these processes, they evolve through formation of granulation tissue to formation of scar connective tissue. So this is actually what is the granulation tissue. Do you have any questions about this? If not, maybe we can continue with slide number.
Question?
Yes.
So this is a diffuse inflammatory process with granulation tissue.
Yes, it is diffuse chronic inflammation, and we define it as the granulation tissue.
Okay.
The next type of chronic inflammation, this is the granulomatous inflammation. The granulomas can be several types: specific, non-specific, and granulomas around parasites. Here we don't show you non-specific inflammation. An example for non-specific inflammation is, for example, this foreign body type granuloma. This is a non-specific granuloma. Here we show you two granulomas: lung tuberculosis and lung and the sarcoidosis of a lymph node, which are specific types of inflammation. And the next one is the trichinosis, which is also granulomatous inflammation, but it is inflammation around parasites. I will start with the tuberculosis here, which is the most well-known type of granuloma. It's a model for all other granulomas. So in this granuloma here, well, in this specimen, you will see that this is a lung. How do you know that this is a lung? When you look here, you will see this alveolar structure of the lung. So when you define that this is the lung, you will see here several areas of necrosis. So here we have a big area of necrosis, a smaller area of necrosis, another area of necrosis, another area of necrosis. Here there are some smaller areas of necrosis. But you will see that these necrotic areas are of different size, different shape, and they look quite chaotic. So there is different types and shapes of this necrosis. When you look closer at that necrosis, you will see that it actually totally erases the structure of the organ. We don't see any alveolar structures there, no vascular structures in this area, just the necrosis and some inflammatory cells. Such kind of necrosis, which is quite thick, and it leads to total erasure of the structure of the organ. We define that as caseous necrosis. When we tell caseous necrosis, we think mostly about tuberculosis, and here it is indeed tuberculosis. The most typical cells in the tuberculosis, these are the multinucleated giant cells. Here we see quite a few of them, and you see that they have multiple nuclei, and these nuclei are located at the periphery of these giant cells. Such type of giant cells with this location of the nuclei at the periphery of the cells, not all over the cells, but just at the periphery, we define them as Langhans cells. So we have multinucleated Langhans cells, and we can see also some epithelioid cells. These epithelioid cells are over here. When they cooperate, when they fuse, they merge to each other, they form these multinucleated giant cells. Actually, these multinucleated giant cells are a merger of multiple of those epithelioid cells. So, because of these epithelioid cells, we define these granulomas as epithelioid cell granulomas. Uh, and as it is a chronic inflammation, I told you, if to define it as a chronic inflammation, there must be mononuclear inflammatory infiltrate. And here we have multiple lymphocytes, and also we have these collagen fibers, so we have fibrosis. So I told you about the chronic inflammation. We have diffuse chronic inflammation, granulomatous chronic inflammation, polypulse chronic inflammation, but in all types of chronic inflammation, we have fibrosis and mononuclear inflammatory infiltrate. We have that here as well. The specific thing about this granuloma is the caseous necrosis at the center of the granuloma and multinucleated Langhans cells. We can see that in all granulomas here. Even in the smallest of the granulomas, it is much better to see. We have caseous necrosis in the center, epithelioid cells and multinucleated giant cells type Langhans, lymphocytes, and fibrosis around it. So this is the specific granuloma. Another specific granuloma that looks very much like these tuberculous granulomas is, for example, the granuloma in syphilis. But in that granuloma, the specific thing about this granuloma in syphilis is actually that we have almost the same structure. The only difference between the caseous, the tuberculous granuloma and the syphilis granuloma is that in syphilis granuloma, we have no lymphocytes there, but they are substituted by plasma cells. So that makes this granuloma specific, and we can tell instantly that this is a syphilis. In this case, we can tell instantly that this is tuberculosis. First, it is the typical location in the lung. We have caseous necrosis, we have these Langhans cells, etc., etc. So this is about this type of specific granuloma. Another specific granuloma here is this sarcoidosis granuloma. Well, in this specimen, it is hard to say in which organ it is, but it is supposedly in some lymph organ, because you can see here so much of lymph tissue. It is encapsulated, so probably it is a lymph node, but anyway, you cannot tell. But you can tell here that it is a granulomatous inflammation, because we see multiple of those granulomas. In contrast to tuberculosis, here these granulomas are defined as non-caseating granulomas because there is no necrosis in the center of the granulomas. Otherwise, they have all the components of the granulomas. They have lymphocytes, they have multinucleated giant cells, they have epithelioid cells, they have the fibrosis, which surrounds the granulomas, but there is no necrosis here. Another feature of this granulomatous disease is that we have a multiple closely packed granulomas of relatively equal size. In contrast to tuberculosis, let me show again the tuberculosis. Sorry. In contrast to tuberculosis, where I showed you that there were granulomas and necrotic areas of different size and different shape, here these granulomas are all one shape, and they are relatively uniform. They have equal sizes. You can just compare here. Small granuloma, small granuloma, small granuloma. Well, there is a small difference in size, and they are so closely packed. In contrast to this, look at these granulomas. They are not closely packed. They are away from each other, and they are of different size and shape. Such structure of small, closely packed, non-caseating granulomas we have only in sarcoidosis, so it is easy to put the diagnosis here. That makes this granuloma specific granuloma. And the third type of granuloma here that I will show, it is a granuloma around parasites. The first thing that you will see here is that this granuloma is actually in skeletal muscle tissue. Okay, you can see here the muscle cells. Some of those muscle cells, they have this transversal fine striation, and their nuclei are not located at the center of the cell, but they are multiple, and they are located at the periphery of the cell. Such structure of a muscle with striation and peripheral location of the nuclei we have only in skeletal muscles, and this is how we actually define that this is a skeletal muscle. And in these skeletal muscles, we see such structures. You see here a foreign body. This is not a muscle cell. This is some other organism. This is a worm here, and it makes these coils or spirals. That's why we call that Trichinella spiralis. Here there is another. Well, here actually we have some epithelioid cells. But let me find the more demonstrative one. Okay, here it is good. You can see this spiral structure of the worm here. Here we have some epithelioid cells, and in some areas you can find even some multinucleated giant cells. Well, this one looks like a multinucleated giant cell. It's a big one, and it has several nuclei. And of course, we have some lymphocytes around this granuloma. And the only thing that is not very good visible here, this is the fibrosis. But usually these granulomas, they end with fibrosis of these organisms when they actually start healing. So this is about the sarcoid granuloma. You're asking about this. Let me just check. Why are there no more eosinophils present in the inflammatory response parasites? Well, you can see here at the periphery that there are some inflammatory cells. They're mostly plasma cells here, as you can see, but usually there must be some eosinophilic granulocytes. Usually we have blood eosinophily, and usually the inflammation is contains some eosinophilic granulocytes, but on this specimen they are not very clearly visible. Well, here we have an eosinophil, but there are just a few of them. It is mostly these epithelioid cells in this area. Well, it depends on the case. In some cases, we have more prominent eosinophili. Here we have just a few eosinophils between other inflammatory cells. But by rule, it must be mostly eosinophils here. Okay, so we continue with another type of inflammation. Well, actually, we finished with, no, we haven't finished with the inflammation. Here in slide number 31, we have some so-called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. As it is thyroiditis, we must see a thyroid gland here. And here we can see this structure of the thyroid. Okay, we have a lot of these thyroid follicles. They are full of thyroid colloid. But you see that the structure of this thyroid is quite changed. Actually, these follicles, they grow in groups which form these nodules. Usually that reflects in the nodular structure of the whole gland, which is enlarged, and that's why we define this as nodular goiter. Well, this nodular goiter is usually accompanied by this inflammation, which is so severe. Actually, it is a lymphocytic inflammation. We see so many lymphocytes here that actually are so much that there are so many that they make some lymph tissue structures. Like here, you can see a lymph follicle with a germinal center. When we have abundance of lymphocytes, they usually tend to organize into this follicular structure. And here we see such a follicular structure. It's a germinal center. In the thyroid, when we have such abundant inflammation with formation of germinal centers, we define this as thyroiditis of Hashimoto. It is an autoimmune disease in which these lymphocytes actually they attack the cells which are producing colloid, and that's why around these infiltrates you will see so many atrophic colloids, because they are under attack of these inflammatory cells, which destroy them and cause this change in the thyroid. They cause atrophy and less production of colloid, which results in hypothyroidism. And this reflects in this nodular structure of the gland, which that's why usually the Hashimoto's thyroiditis is accompanied by nodular goiter. So here we have such thyroiditis of Hashimoto. Of course, they can ask you about the autoimmune diseases. These are here, they are genuine autoimmune diseases. They are not related to hypersensitivity reactions. Here we have a primary attack of the thyroid follicles and the follicular ingredients with these lymphocytes causing this change. Do you want to ask something about this thyroiditis? Okay. Should continue with the next slide. well, we haven't discussed this, the prostate hyperplasia. Did we discuss it before? In the adaptive processes, maybe we have discussed it. Well, here we have an allergic reaction, which is of hypersensitivity type 1 reactions, like number 31. Actually, we see multiple fragments of soft tissue which are lined with squamous epithelium, and in some other areas you can see that it is not only squamous but some ciliated columnar epithelium. If only I can find it. Here we have some columnar epithelium. Just the cilia on the top are not very well visible, but when I can show it to you, maybe here. Okay, here it is clearly visible that it is a columnar epithelium, and such epithelium, these two types of epithelia we see in the nasal cavity. And we define this as a respiratory epithelium. When you define that this is a nasal cavity, you will start with that, well, these fragments of tissue, they are lined with these epithelia, and they are lined maybe in 3 sides of their circumscription. So they look polypoid. So that type of inflammation, which results in formation of these polypose structures, we call that a polypose inflammation. Here, this inflammation is of allergic origin. This is hypersensitivity reaction type 1. And in hypersensitivity reaction type 1, we see abundance of eosinophilic granulocytes. And here we have mostly these eosinophilic granulocytes, and we have also these plasma cells. This abundance of eosinophilic granulocytes shows this allergic origin of that kind of inflammation. So here we have this allergic rhinitis, or allergic nasal polyps are actually here. Do you have any questions about this specimen? Just a second, please. Okay, Arjun has a question. What is your question? You want to ask something about the specimen? Okay, so we continue with the next slide then. We continue with the tumors. And well, you know that in the classification of the tumors, we have epithelial tumors, mesenchymal tumors, tumors of the pigmented tissue, the teratomas, which are the mixed tumors, the ectodermal brain tumors, etc., etc. We start with the epithelial tumors, and you know that the epithelium is divided in two types. It is covering epithelium and glandular epithelium. The covering epithelium tumors, they usually grow to the top. I'm sorry, just a second. Sorry. The covering epithelium tumors, they usually grow to the surface of that covering epithelium because there is less resistance in this direction. One of these tumors of the covering epithelium is the papillary carcinoma of the bladder. So the malignant types of these tumors of the covering epithelium, we call them carcinomas. And not only carcinomas, but if they, we usually give them some more prominent feature. And such feature here is formation of papillae. Usually when we name such tumors, first we give the name of the tissue of origin. Here it is the urothelium. In this case, the urothelium, you know, it's the covering epithelium of the bladder. And then we name that a carcinoma. So here it is urothelial carcinoma. But one of the most prominent features of that urothelial carcinoma is the formation of papillary structures. You can see here such papillary structures. That's why we define this as papillary urothelial carcinoma. Actually, how do you know that this is a bladder? Well, you have to find some structure that is normal here. And actually, the only normal epithelium that I see here is in this part of the specimen. Here you can see that there is some epithelium. Well, at first glance, this epithelium looks like columnar epithelium, but when you look closer, you will see that it is not composed of columnar cells. Because in the columnar epithelium, usually the nuclei of the cells are located at the basal membrane. And here the nuclei are in different levels above the basal membrane. We have some which are at the basal membrane, and we have some nuclei that are at the top of those cells, and they look completely like each other. So there is no tissue and cellular polymorphism here, but here we have so-called umbrella cells. You see, all the cells actually reach the top, and they form these umbrella-like structures on the top, and they also reach the basal membrane here. So this is urothelium. Once you recognize the urothelium, you go alongside this urothelium, and you will see that in some areas the urothelium becomes thicker, and it becomes so thick that it starts to make these papilla-like protrusions to the top. The definition of papilla is a finger-like protrusion which has a fibrovascular core, and here you can see these fibrovascular cores. In this area, you will see that these fibrovascular cores of the papillae are covered with very thick epithelium, and that epithelium merges with the epithelia of the other fibrovascular cores. Such merging epithelium we see only in tumors. You will see that some of those fibrovascular cores are branching, like here. And the structure here is very typical for these malignancies of that caliber. But to name something malignant, we have to see some cellular and nuclear atypia. And here we see, well, there is some mild atypia actually, but in some of the cells we see these prominent nucleoli which lack in other cells. So there is some atypia, some at that tumor. And so this is such well, malignancy of the bladder. Actually, by all the rules for the tumors, well, we should call this malignant tumor carcinoma in situ, but it's maybe typical for the bladder that we don't do that. We call that just non-invasive papillary carcinoma of the bladder. Well, this tumor is quite an aggressive one. It usually doesn't give metastasis, as it doesn't have an invasive growth, but it spreads on the surface of the bladder and fully obturates the bladder. So, well, it has such aggressive biological behavior, although it is usually not invasive cancer here at that place. But you can see this papillary structure of the tumor. Do you have some questions about this papillary urothelial carcinoma here? Okay, so we continue with the next slide. I will try to group these specimens into several groups, yes. Well, it is hard to me to explain why is it malignant, the urothelial cancer, because you will see in other malignant tumors, the leading malignant feature, it is the invasive growth. Here it is considered a malignant tumor because of the cellular and nuclear atypia of the cells. They differ very much from the originating cells. You see, I will show you the normal urothelium. Over here. Just a second. Well, look at the normal urothelium and look at the epithelial cells here. Well, there is a great difference. That means that there is some cellular and nuclear atypia. Look again at the normal cells. Okay, just I will zoom out. Sorry. Look at the normal cells with their small nuclei, relatively small nuclei, and the cells have a typical appearance. And now look at the tumor cells. They have much greater nuclei, and they have more abundant cytoplasm. Here we have increase of this nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. These features are features of nuclear and cellular atypia that we see only in malignant cells, and this is why here we define that as a malignant tumor. It lacks only one property that is the most important for malignant tumors. This is the invasive growth. But well, we define this as a cancer of the bladder, although there is no okay, which vessels do you mean? Here, well, these are, you can see that these are vessels. They're full of red blood cells, you see. So these are vessels. These are the fibrovascular cores which contain, that's why we call them vascular, because they contain these blood vessels. Okay, was that clear, the difference between the benign and malignant tumors? Okay. So the next type of this surface epithelium cancer is the papilloma of the skin. Okay, the papilloma of the skin is a benign tumor. First, you have to say that this is the skin. Look at the periphery of the specimen again, and you will see that it is a skin. It has epidermis at the top, it has hair follicles, it has sebaceous glands, so it is a skin. It's not even a mucosa because we have the hairs. Okay, here we can see these hair follicles and sebaceous glands. When we look here, you will see this prominent area where there is such overgrowth of the epidermis. The epidermis had become much larger, but if you look closer at that epidermis, you will see that there is actually no difference between the normal epidermis, like here, I showed it here. Okay, look at the cells in the normal epidermis. Look at their shape, the size of their nuclei. It is quite a normal epidermis. And I will show you now the abnormal epidermis in the tumor. Okay, actually it is overgrowth of the epidermis, but well, there is maybe some mild nuclear atypia, but you can still see that these cells have abundant pink cytoplasm. They even have these intercellular spikes, these bridges between the cells, which are the desmosomes. They haven't lost that. They still have maturation of the epithelium. You can see that there is some granulosa cell layer, there is a basal cell layer. So there is a good maturation of the cells, no nuclear and cellular atypia. It is only the arrangement of cells which is changed. Actually, you see that the cells arranged in such nests where We have some keratin production in the middle of those nests. So there is some tissue atypia, but without nuclear and cellular atypia. When we have a tissue atypia only, without nuclear and cellular atypia, then we define these tumors as benign tumors. So both in benign and malignant tumors, we have tissue atypia. But nuclear and cellular atypia is only for malignant tumors. We usually don't find atypical cells in benign tumors. Is that clear? So in order to call it a tumor, there must be tissue atypia, but if it is only this, then it is a benign tumor. If there is nuclear and cellular atypia, then it is a malignant tumor. And of course, if you look at the bottom of the tumor, you will see that there is no invasive growth. In contrast to this, I will open now the malignant counterpart of that tumor. It is the squamous cell cancer. Well, here you can see that again we have some cellular atypia. These cells are not making flat structures, but they are making these nested structures. Well, this is a well-differentiated cancer. That's why we can distinguish the basal cell layer, and there is some maturation here in those nests towards the center. The cells become more mature, but look, they do not make, for example, this granulosa cell layer. In some areas, they maturate and even form keratin, like here, but still there is no granulosa cell layer, so there is some impairment in the in this maturation. In some areas, they make abundant keratin production, but still no granulosa cells. And in some areas, especially at the bottom of the tumor, over here, you will see that there is a nuclear and cellular atypia that is more prominent there. Look here at the atypia. Some of the cells are small, some are big. There are some mitotic figures. Here there is one, here there is another, here there is a third one, here we have a fourth one. On one microscopic field, even on high magnification, I can find 4 mitotic figures, which is actually a very big mitotic activity. This high mitotic activity is typical for malignancies. Usually, you know that they are fast-growing tumors, so a lot of their cells actually undergo mitosis and they divide. Well, although this is a well-differentiated tumor, you can see this high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. In normal epithelial cells, I will show you again the normal epithelial cells in that tumor. Look even at the bottom of the cells. We have cells with so abundant cytoplasm. And here you will see that the nucleus is quite bigger compared to the cytoplasm. That means high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. But the most important feature for these malignant tumors is that there is no sharp demarcation between the margin of the tumor and the surrounding tissue. In some areas, it seems like some of the tumor cells or even some groups of cells are detached from the main tumor mass and they infiltrate into the surrounding tissue. You can see this nest that is going deeper into the tissue. You can see here, and there are even some individual cells that may go to the surrounding connective tissue, and it is sometimes hard. Well, look at here. These are apparently tumor cells. They are detached from the main tumor mass, which is here. And when we see such a thing, actually we define this as infiltrative growth. It is hard to say where the tumor ends and where the surrounding tissue starts in some areas. And this is typical for infiltrative tumors. And if a tumor is infiltrative, it is malignant tumor. There are no benign tumors with invasive growth. So here we have invasion of the tumor cells into the surrounding tissues. And this is the most important property of any malignancy. Okay, so here we have a malignant tumor. Well, in some areas it looks very much like the normal cells, and here because it is a well differentiated tumor, it still can produce keratin in the center of those nests, so that defines it as a well differentiated tumor, but it has also infiltrative growth that defines it as a malignant tumor. Is that clear? Well, in this case, you cannot tell which is the organ because there is no organ structure here. It can be the skin, but it can be the cervix of the uterus, for example, or the tongue, or esophagus, or any other organ that has some dense connective tissue in it. You cannot tell what is the organ here. According to this dense connective tissue, it's probably dermis, but I cannot tell for sure. It may be cervix as well. The cervix of the uterus, I mean. So that's why you cannot tell what kind of organ it is. So this was about these covering epithelium tumors. Well, maybe a transition between the covering epithelium and glandular tumors is this specimen. This is the, okay, I just want to tell you of another tumor of the skin that derives from the squamous epithelium. I forgot about this. And this is the basal cell cancer of the skin. Okay, you can see here that this is the skin. You can see the epidermis here. It has keratinization on the top, and we have a hair follicle here, so it is a skin, and it looks perfectly normal. But next to this skin, actually, you can see here in this area, we have epidermis on the top, and from the basal cell layer starts a tumor growth of cells which resemble very much the basal cells of the basal cell layer of the epidermis. The basal cells, these are the reserve cells of the epidermis. They are small. Well, they primarily have this high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, but they usually stay in one row at the bottom of the epidermis. But here you can see that they overgrow and get deeper into the dermis. And actually you can see here that this infiltrative growth, some of the cells go deeper and deeper, and they get deeper into the dermis, but they preserve their ability to form this basal layer. Although all the cells are of a basal cell origin, at the margin of the nests, they tend to form this basal cell layer, and they even make this, well, basal lamina-like structures here. We call this growth at the bottom, which looks like a palisade, a wooden fence. Here, actually, we call this palisade arrangement of the cells at the edges of the nests. When we see this palisade arrangement of cells which resemble the basal cell layer of the epidermis, we define this as a basal cell carcinoma of the skin. This is one of the most common cancers of the skin. Fortunately, it has only a local growth, and usually it's casuistic to have metastatic spread, so it has only a local growth and doesn't spread through the lymphatics or through the blood circulation into other organs. So this is the basal cell cancer of the skin. You can see another phenomenon here. Look at this pale area here. It is composed of connective tissue, but it has some myxoid change. Around epithelial tumors, we always have a reaction of the epithelial tumors of the surrounding, to the epithelial tumors of the surrounding stroma. This overgrowth of stroma, and it is quite rough. You can see here that it has some myxoid change. This is called a desmoplastic reaction. Usually the stroma reacts to the tumors which grow in it. And also we have inflammatory reaction. We call this inflammatory reaction a stromal reaction. So always around tumors, we have this desmoplastic and stromal reaction as a reaction of the organism to the tumor changed cells. These cells have mutations. They express on their surface some proteins which are changed, and this provokes an inflammatory reaction because the organism detects them as foreign bodies. The immune system cannot recognize them as own antigens, and that's why it attacks them. And this attack is represented with this inflammatory reaction underneath. And of course, this inflammatory reaction provokes a desmoplastic reaction. It changes the environment because the inflammatory mediators, they interact with the fibroblasts, and that changes the connective tissue around it. So this is the slide number 38. A transition between the covering epithelium tumors and the glandular tumors is the colorectal carcinoma or adenocarcinoma. This is because on one hand, the mucosa of the colon is a covering epithelium because it covers the internal surface of this hollow organ. On the other hand, it is composed of glands. It's actually a glandular epithelium. So it is both glandular and covering epithelium. That's why here the tumors may have properties of both tumors. They can grow to the surface as polyps, and they are making glandular structures. And here, actually, we have a colon. At this part, you can see the normal colonic mucosa. Here, the mucosa is perfectly normal. And at this area, actually, you can see that this colonic mucosa undergoes some dysplastic change. First, the glands become bigger and with some peculiar shape. And you can see that the nuclei of these columnar cells, they are not located only next to the basal membrane as it is in the normal cells, but they grow upwards to the apex of the to the lumen of to the apex of the columnar cells and to the lumen of the glands. Such displacement of the nuclei from their normal location at the bottom next to the basal membrane upwards to the lumen, we call this process a dysplasia. So it's a dysplastic change. You know that the dysplastic change is a premalignant change. Usually, it has several degrees: low-grade dysplasia, moderate-grade dysplasia, and high-grade dysplasia. The high-grade dysplasia that we see here is the final step before malignancy. So here we have these premalignant changes of dysplasia in this colonic epithelium, and here we have a genuine tumor. High-grade dysplasia can be defined as a carcinoma in situ, but here we see some very atypical glands with a very different shape, with dysplastic change, and you can see that these glands are growing very deep. They grow into the submucosa where they should not be. If they're in submucosa, that means that they have infiltrated there, they have invaded there. And if we have an invasive growth, that means that this tumor is malignant. And here we have this malignant tumor that invades not only the submucosa, but it even gets it into the muscularis propria layer of this colon, of this intestine. And you can see that these glands are going deeper into the smooth muscle tissue here, and some glands are surrounded by smooth muscle as they grow deep into that. In hollow organs like the colon, this depth of invasion is considered a change that is, it defines the stage of the growth of that tumor. The more shallow the organ is, the more shallow the tumor is, that means that the less is the stage there. So, for example, if we see the tumor glands only in the submucosa, we define that as T1 tumor according to the TNM classification. If it goes into the muscularis propria layer, like it is here, it is defined as T2 tumor. If it goes beyond the muscularis layer into the pericolic fat, then it is a T3 tumor. If it goes further into the, well, over here we have some serosa. If it infiltrates the serosa, then it is defined as T4 tumor. T4 is if the tumor invades into another organ in the vicinity. So if it is a rectum, for example, here the tumor may grow into the bladder, into the prostate if it is a male, into the uterus if it is a female. So this is the T4 stage of that tumor. You have to know the TNM staging of the tumors. What do they mean? In hollow organs are like this. The stage is defined by the depth of invasion. In solid organs like the breast, like the liver, like the lungs, the stage of the tumor is defined by the size of the tumor. So, for example, for the breast, T1 tumor, if the tumor is less than 2 centimeters in diameter, if it is between 2 and 5, it is a grade 2, it is stage 2, T2. If it is greater than 5, it is stage T3. If it invades the skin, the chest wall, or other structures in the vicinity, it is tumor T4. So this is actually how this TNM classification system works. If it obtains the surrounding the regional lymph nodes, then we define it as N1, and in different areas, this N1, 2, or 3 depends on how many lymph nodes are obtained in those regional lymph nodes, but in different areas, the number of the lymph nodes that need to be evaluated in order to put it in N1, N2, or N3 is different. So I cannot tell it for sure how many they should be because they are different in different locations. But for the M stage, that means distant metastasis, it is the same. If there are no distant metastases detected, it is M0. If there are distant metastases, it is M1. There are no M2. And if you cannot define any of these T, N, or M because of insufficient information, for example, you have found a metastasis of the tumor, but you cannot tell where is the tumor, then you define the T stage as Tx, because you know that there is a tumor, but you cannot stage it. If we have a tumor somewhere, but you cannot access the lymph nodes or the distant metastases because there is no sufficient information about them, then you define that as NX or N or MX. But if you know that there is a metastasis, you will define that as M1. Okay? Did you get the principles of the staging system? I hope so.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's go further to another glandular epithelial tumor. Well, talking about the stages, here I want to show you some malignant change in lymph nodes. You can tell that these are lymph nodes because they are very small. You see, they are composed of lymphatic tissue. You can see the germinal centers of these follicular structures here. So it is a lymph node. It has a marginal sinus. It has a capsule around it. So it is a lymph node. And in lymph nodes, there should be only lymph tissue. But look at this periphery of this lymph node. Here we have glandular structures. And you can tell that this is a malignant tumor because we have cells with high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. And anyway, glands should not be in lymph nodes. This means only one. That means that we have a lymph node metastasis. And here we see another lymph node and another metastasis in this lymph node. If you look closer, you will see multiple other glands. So probably we have a tumor in N1 stage or maybe more. Here we see only 2 of 3 lymph nodes with metastasis. So the tumors usually grow and make metastasis in the regional lymph nodes and later on in distant lymph nodes. If we have a metastasis in the regional lymph node, we define that as N1. If we have a metastasis in non-regional lymph node, for example, we have a cancer of the colon, but we have a lymph node in the neck, for example. That means not regional lymph node. It is a very distant lymph node in totally different part of the body. So that means that we will not define that as N1 stage, but we will define this as M1 stage, like a metastasis. Okay? So even though we have a metastasis in a lymph node, if it is a distant lymph node, then we define that as metastatic lymph, M1 stage. What about sentinel lymph nodes? Well, the sentinel lymph node is it may be one or several lymph nodes which are the first level of defense of that tumor area. In order to visualize these lymph nodes, the surgeons usually inject some ink in the capsule or in the margin, actually, of the tumor. And they are usually stained, these parts of the tumor. Just a second, please. I'm sorry, but a patient just came in into my room. So the sentinel lymph nodes, they are usually N1. They are N1 because they are very close. They are actually the nearest lymph nodes to the tumor. A sentinel, you know, it is a guardian. They're called sentinel because they are nearest of the lymph nodes. Okay, so the next tumor, I want to show you a benign tumor of the breast. It's a benign glandular tumor, and you can see now why it is benign. First feature that of this, the benign character of that tumor is that the tumor is very well circumscribed. In contrast to the malignant tumors, you can see that actually it is a nodule. It is very well circumscribed, and it is even surrounded by a capsule. It is encapsulated tumor. And you can see that this tumor is composed of these glands, which are spread throughout this fibrovascular stroma. And these glands, well, they look atypical. So there is some structural atypia here. But the cells, even though we see some mitotic figures here, they do not look very different than the normal cells. But they are not arranged properly. They grow in these cribriform structures, like there is a merger of different glands. And another feature that you see here is that compression of those glandular structures by the surrounding stroma. Here, the interaction between the glands and the stroma is so strong that the stroma is compressing the glands. And they are smashed between these proliferated stromal elements, and that's why they make these leaf-like structures here. And as we have two features here of it's a glandular tumor, but with a strong reaction of the stroma here. This is a fibrous stroma. We define this as a fibroadenoma. And here we have the fibroadenoma of the breast. Another very typical feature about this tumor is that the stroma around the glands is with this bluish shade. Well, this is as a reaction to that epithelium here. Actually, some consider that even the stroma here is a tumor component, but actually it is only the glands which are the tumor, and the stroma is a reactive change to that epithelial tumor. So this is the fibroadenoma of the breast. Okay, any questions about the fibroadenoma? Okay, if no questions, I proceed to next slide. Is there any other epithelial tumor? Fibroadenoma, colorectal. Actually, we have finished with the epithelial tumors, and we continue with the mesenchymal tumors here. And the mesenchymal tumors here are the leiomyoma, lipoma, hemangioma, fibrosarcoma, and liposarcoma. You know that the mesenchymal tumors, if their names end with oma, they are the benign tumors. The first part of the name, leiomyo in this case, or lipo in this case, or hemangio in this case, defines the tissue of origin. Leiomyo means smooth muscle in Latin. Lipo means adipose, and hemangio means that it derives from the blood vessels. Fibro, it derives from fibroblasts, etc. If we have the suffix sarcoma, that means that this is a malignant tumor. So let us start with the leiomyoma. And here we have such a leiomyoma, or also known as fibroid of the uterus. Actually, it's a tumor of the smooth muscle tissue. Obviously, this is the tumor, and this is the normal smooth muscle tissue. Look here, in the normal smooth muscle tissue, it is composed of these spindle cells, and these spindle cells have these elongated cigar-shaped nuclei, but all of these smooth muscle cells, they are arranged parallel to each other. This is the normal arrangement of the smooth muscle. So this is the proper arrangement. All the cells go together in these parallel fascicles. Just a second, please. Okay, so here we have properly arranged smooth muscles. And in this area, look, we have the same smooth muscles. Just between them, we have some changes in the stroma. We have some hyalinization of the stroma. But look at the smooth muscles. They are not arranged properly. They make these intersections. In some areas, they make these intersecting fascicles. You can see some whorls in some areas. We have this structural atypia here, not improper arrangement of the smooth muscles. So, but when we look closer at the cells, you will see no sign of nuclear or cellular atypia. So we have a tumor that has a structural atypia without nuclear and cellular atypia. And if you look at the margins of that tumor, you can see that these margins are quite sharply demarcated from the surrounding tissue. That means that this tumor is fully benign. So here we have features of a benign tumor. As it originates from the smooth muscles, we define that as a leiomyoma. Well, here, the next tumor is a benign tumor of adipose tissue. You can see that it is composed of adipose tissue, adipocytes here. Well, you cannot tell that there is some structural atypia because these are not spindle cells, but they are round cells. No matter how do you arrange them, they will look like this. Only because they are around, and the only feature that defines it as a tumor is that you see that it is composed, it is making adipose tissue, which is encapsulated. You can see these fine fibrous capsule around this tumor, and this encapsulation of the tumor defines that this is a tumor. Actually, this is maybe the structural atypia, formation of a capsule, and lack of nuclear and cellular atypia defines it as a benign tumor. And in regards to this, I want to show you the malignant counterpart of that tumor. Okay, this is the liposarcoma, slide number 45. In which you can easily see that it derives from the adipose tissue, because you can see some adipocytes here. But some of those adipocytes are not mature. We define them as adipoblasts. And you can see in some of them some nuclear and cellular atypia. Actually, you can see those cells here. They look quite ugly. They do not look like the normal adipocytes. Even those which have a good differentiation, you can see that some of them are big, some of them are small. So there is some discrepancy in the size and shape. That means cellular atypia. Here you can see the nuclear atypia is very prominent. So this is what we will define as a malignant tumor that derives from the adipose tissue, and we call that liposarcoma. Okay, so this is a liposarcoma. You can easily see the difference here between the liposarcoma and lipoma. Okay, very well arranged, normal appearing adipose tissue, just encapsulated with this adipose tissue, which doesn't look much like adipose tissue, because there is some structural atypia, some nuclear atypia, cellular atypia, especially in these areas. So it is a liposarcoma. We cannot even discuss the infiltrative growth here because it is not possible. Another benign tumor of mesenchymal origin is this tumor. Obviously, this is a tumor of the skin. You can see some epidermis over here. Do you see? Actually, maybe it's not the skin because I don't see skin appendages. Maybe it's somewhere in the visible mucoses. You know that lots of mucoses are covered with squamous epithelium. So this here, for example, can be a tumor of the nasal cavity or the oral cavity or the vagina or somewhere else. And actually you see that this tumor is composed of these cells which make vascular structures. And these vascular structures are even full of blood. If you look closer, actually these vascular structures look very much like the granulation tissue, for example. But there is an element that is missing here. Well, if there was, for example, some inflammation here, we would have strong issues of a differential diagnosis between this tumor and granulation tissue, for example. But actually, there is no inflammatory response here. So, and we see that these are endothelial cells, the cells that line the blood vessels, and there are even more endothelial cells between them. And actually, you will see that even though this tumor is not very well circumscribed, there is no nuclear and cellular atypia in those cells. So we define this tumor as a tumor of the blood vessels, tumor of the endothelial cells. As these vessels are full of blood, we call this hemangioma. So it is composed of the cells which make the blood vessels. So here we have a hemangioma. If it was composed of vessels which communicate with the lymph system, then we would call that lymphangioma. Then the capillaries that are formed here would not be full of red blood cells, but there would not be cells at all inside them. So here we have this benign hemangioma. Okay, and maybe the most malignant of those mesenchymal tumors, actually, when they did differentiate to this extent, all the mesenchymal tumors can transform into this tumor. And this is the so-called fibrosarcoma. It is called fibrosarcoma because it derives from the fibroblasts. You can see these typical, this structural atypia here. The tumor is composed of spindle cells, but these spindle cells are not properly arranged. They are chaotically disarranged. They make these fascicles, and very typical for that tumor is that herringbone structure of the fascicles. You see some of the cells go in this direction, other goes in this direction. So this is the herringbone structure of the fibrosarcoma. When we see such a structure like here, we define that as a sarcomatoid arrangement of the spindle cells. And you see the tumor that is not very well circumscribed. Here at this area, you can see some cells which detach from the main tumor mass. They invade into the surrounding stroma. There is inflammatory stromal reaction. So that means that this tumor is malignant. It is a highly aggressive tumor, actually. And this is the last of the mesenchymal tumors. Okay. Over here, and the only tumor that was left for today is the skin melanoma. Okay, here you can see that this is the skin because we have epidermis, hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands. So it is a skin. And under the skin, we have a tumor. We have a tumor composed of solid areas of tumor cells, some showing very severe nuclear atypia, but maybe the thing that you can recognize the tumor with is that it contains this brown pigment. It is the only pigmented tumor. It is neither epithelial nor mesenchymal tumor. That tumor derives from the pigmented tissue. It derives from the melanocytes. Normally, we have melanocytes at the basal layer of the skin. Between the basal cells, we have some pigmented cells, melanocytes, which give the color of the skin. They have a protective function. You know that the melanin pigment protects us from the ionizing UV radiation of the sun. So here we have this tumor, but it is a pigmented tumor. Some of the cells have preserved their ability to produce this melanin pigment in them. That's why we can easily tell that this is a melanoma. It is more difficult to tell that this is a melanoma when the cells have lost their ability to produce melanin pigment. Then we have to use some other methods to prove that tumor. Then we use some special stainings, especially immunostainings. These tumors are positive for S100 protein. This is the antibody that we use to detect the melanocytes. And also, even though this tumor looks quite circumscribed, here in this area, you can see that we have inflammatory reaction to that tumor. And also you can see the infiltrative growth of the tumor because somewhere here, for example, you can see that some individual tumor cells are going deeper into the surrounding tissues. These are tumor cells. You see they have infiltrated into the adipose tissue surrounding the tumor. So here it is an infiltrative growth. Actually, we have to tell that this is the most malignant one of those tumors. And it has a very aggressive behavior. It very early gives metastasis under the skin. Here we have lots of blood vessels, and the tumor gets into those blood vessels, and it gives very early metastasis. Usually at the time of the diagnosis of the tumor, we have metastasis somewhere in the body. So this aggressive behavior has to be coped very fast. Okay, do you have any questions about these specimens up to here? Do you want me to go through the specimens before slide 24, or they are clear to you? Do you have any questions about other topics of the material, about the exam? Do you think we have missed slide? Okay, slide 23 then. Someone asked about, the Giti asked about slide 23. Yes, you will get these slides on the exam date. Actually, we will give you slides directly from the Blackboard, from here. Okay, let's first show slide 24, then I will show this cellular embolism, hemorrhage or ischemia. Okay, we will discuss these. If you have some issues here about the fibrinous pericarditis, the first thing here is to define the organ. It's obviously a muscular organ, but you can have to tell what is the organ here. And well, in transversal section of these cells, you cannot tell because they look round. That's why you have to look for an area when we have a longitudinal section, more longitudinal section of the muscle cells. Here, for example, we have this more longitudinal section, and if you look closer, you will see this striation of those muscle cells. Let me see here. Do you see those stripes here? Especially here. We have lots of those stripes in this area. That means that this is a cardiac muscle. So we have a heart here. And here is the myocardium. Here, this adipose tissue means that this is the epicardium. And the serosal surface of the epicardium is the pericardium. And here, this is the pericardium. But upon the pericardium, you will see this coating of these pink fibers, acellular pink fibers. And this is fibrin. If you're not sure that this is fibrin, and you may think that this is some other fibers, you have to tell what kind of staining you can use to prove fibrin. Can you tell? Yes, PTAH is the staining that you have to use for fibrin. And these fibrin, you see, it has multiple protrusions. In some areas, these protrusions may look like hairs. That's why we call that hairy heart or corvillosum in Latin. Okay, so this is the fibrinous pericarditis. You can see that it is an inflammatory process because you can see that there are a lot of inflammatory cells between that pericarditis. So it is a fibrinous exudative inflammation here. So you wanted to ask about the cellular embolism. Cellular embolism was in the first slides, maybe 4 or 5. Okay, slide number 4. What about the organ here? Can you tell? What is the organ? Obviously, it has alveolar structures. Also, we have another telltale sign is that we have this black pigment, this anthracotic pigment. So this is a lung, but you can clearly see the blood vessels of the lung. But in some of the blood vessels, we have these glandular structures. Let's look again here. It is more obvious that we have a glandular structure inside a vessel. Okay, and in these glandular structures, you will see clearly that there is a high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. We have some mucus production here, some nuclear atypia. So it must be tumor cells. But they are inside blood vessels. When we have something that does not belong to blood into the blood vessels, then we call that emboli. And here we have these tumor emboli. The tumor emboli we find when the tumor invades some venous vessels. They invade first the venous vessels because you see that the venous vessels are much thinner than the arterial vessels. Okay, so they are easier to be invaded, and all the veins from the large circle of circulation are actually getting into the lungs, and actually into the lungs they make lung metastasis. That's why most of the tumors actually give metastasis to the lungs. And here, this tumor embolus is inside a blood vessel, but you can see here that these tumor cells are outside the vessels. They are in this connective tissue that is quite rough, and this rough connective tissue is actually this desmoplastic reaction to the tumor. Here, actually, we have a metastasis of this tumor. So the origin of that tumor can be of any organ of the body, any glandular organ. It can be from the intestines, it can be from the stomach, it can be from the lung itself. It is probably a lung metastasis because I can see that this embolus is in a venous vessel. If it was from outside the lungs, it should be inside an arterial vessel. That's probably a lung metastasis here. Okay, do you want to ask something more about this specimen? Okay, what else did you want to discuss? The hemorrhagic ischemia. The hemorrhagic ischemia is, well, hemorrhage or ischemia. Well, when you talk about hemorrhages, first, the first thing is to define what kind of hemorrhages, because we have hemorrhages that can be through different mechanisms of hemorrhage. It depends on the size of the vessel. If it is a big vessel, the mechanism of hemorrhage is usually because of tearing apart of the vessel. So some mechanical trauma that tears apart the vessel, and that mechanism of cutting the vessel or tearing the vessel apart is called in Latin perrexin. So it is one of the mechanisms of a hemorrhage. Another mechanism through erosion, for example, if you have an inflammatory process or a tumor process, it could simply erode the blood vessels because of the inflammatory infiltration of the vessel wall or a tumor infiltration of the vessel wall. This will lead to erosion of the vessel. The vessel wall will become thinner and weaker, and finally it will open and it will start leaking. That mechanism is called perdiabrosin, through erosion. And the third mechanism we see only in the smallest of the vessels, like these capillaries here. You know that the capillaries, they have small holes in their wall, and if we increase the hydrostatic pressure in them, these red blood cells may go through these holes, and here actually they have gone into the alveolar space. This doesn't destroy the integrity of the vascular wall of these capillaries. The capillaries stay intact, but there is a leakage of blood elements outside the blood vessel, and this mechanism of bleeding is called perdiapedesin. Okay, diapedesis is when a cell goes through a membrane. In this case, it goes. The red blood cells usually go through the vascular membranes. So this is a diapedesis, peridiapedesis. So this is about the hemorrhages. Later on, if we have a hemorrhage, that hemorrhage will